The people who are awarding it are the collective body for local authorities. There are about 450 local authorities in the United Kingdom. A body called the Local Government Association effectively is their collective representative. And they have the best figures on how all councils are doing, because all councils are a member of the Local Government Association. And it's the Local Government Association that has issued a report saying there is 20% of all councils who are getting inevitably into difficulty. In all of those councils, in all of those services over all that period, the expenditure on every service, social services, welfare payments and housing have gone down in every local authority. And in every local authority over that period since 2005, social services, welfare payments and housing have all gone up. Local authorities have been incredibly efficient and effective at it, because we have had a spate of these 114 notices and we will get more, but they staved them off for quite a long time. They'd staved them off by selling assets, reducing services, reducing the quality of services, but it's inevitable that time was going to catch up on them. Effectively, since 2010, the central government has said to local government, that's your problem and you have to resolve it. And at various times since 2010 has added to the problem. So the government can't say that it doesn't know what's coming on the horizon, and neither can it say that it doesn't know what to do about it. It just doesn't want to do that. It doesn't want to take the steps necessary to solve the problem. The current government is in effect saying this is a long-term problem that we're kicking into the long grass until after the next election, which some people think they haven't got much chance of winning.
Welcome to the Spotlight Podcast. It's our 78th episode. We are filming in Nottingham, UK. Today I have a special guest, Professor Peter Murphy, Director of Public Policy and Management Research Group within the Centre for Economics, Policy and Public Management at Nottingham Business School, part of the Nottingham Trent University. Professor Murphy, welcome to the Spotlight Podcast.
Thank you very much indeed.
Could you please tell me a little bit about your experience and your career path so far?
I originally came to Nottingham in 1975 to do postgraduate work on multiple deprivation in the city and to train to be a planning officer. I then spent 23 years in local authorities in the East Midlands, first working as a planning officer and then as the chief executive of a local authority. So after that, I was employed by central government in Whitehall. I still lived in Nottingham, but I was employed in Whitehall for 8 years as the director of local government. And 13 years ago, I came to Nottingham Business School, where I'm currently a professor of public management, as you say.
Recently, you published an article.
Yep.
It's a very interesting article speaking about one contemporary issue regarding the local government. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
In the UK, local authorities have to continuously improve their services and activities to the public. And that's been the law for the last nearly 25 years. But inevitably, local authorities, not all local authorities can continue to do that. And some of them get into difficulty, either financial difficulty or service difficulty. And at the same time that they introduce the requirement for continuous improvement in local authority services, there was created a fallback position for the central government to intervene in local authorities that were either significantly failing in their duty or had become embroiled in scandals, or whether it's service scandals or financial scandals. And that provides for the central government to step in to the local authority when these problems occur. And that's what's happening at the moment.
So basically, this is the section 114 notice. The municipality of Nottingham just released a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
That they are going under...
Yeah, in Nottingham's case, and increasingly in the last 10 years as opposed to the first 10 years, the basis for intervention has primarily been financial problems. And if a council is getting into financial problems, there is a duty, a statutory duty on the chief, well, it's called a Section 151 officer, but it's the chief financial officer of the council, to say if it's getting into difficulties and it predicts that it can't set a balanced budget for the forthcoming year, in other words, income and expenditure are balanced, and it looks to the Section 151 officer that there's no way of getting out of it unless some new external help is forthcoming, then they issue a notice to the council itself saying, we are in financial difficulty, we cannot balance the budget, there is no strategy that I can see that will put us onto an even financial basis. And that notice the council has 21 days to react to that notice. But the likelihood is that it would confirm that notice. More often than not, they confirm. Yeah. Occasionally, people do something or somebody comes out of the blue to save them, but not often. And then the government has to decide whether it's going to step in and appoint commissioners to either oversee the council, monitor it closely, or in Nottingham's case, it's been overseen for over 2 years now. It's more likely that they're going to send in some commissioners to take over some of the running of the council itself.
The article mentions that almost a fifth of England councils warned that they are running out of money. Could you please elaborate on broader spectrum of the key factors? And then we will come to the Nottingham's case in particular.
Well, the people who are warning it are the collective body for local authorities. There are about 450 local authorities in the United Kingdom, but a body called the Local Government Association effectively is their collective representative. And they have the best figures on how all councils are doing, because all councils are a member of the Local Government Association. And it's the Local Government Association that has issued a report saying there is 20% of all councils who are getting inevitably into difficulty. Now, the long-term reason for all of these councils getting into difficulty is fourfold, basically. The first thing is the majority of council income the councils collect is from central government. So they get a subsidy from central government, a revenue subsidy to run the services. And since 2010 to today, that amount of subsidy has decreased in real terms year on year by over 30%. So the biggest part of their income is going down considerably. The amount of income that they can raise themselves is limited, and it's been capped by the government at a few percent. The third biggest issue is that local authorities' biggest service expenditures on things like education, social services, housing, the demand, particularly for adult and children's social services, has been and is historically going up as we've got the cost of living crisis.
Of course.
And then in addition, the people who have the demand for those services are the poorer, more vulnerable communities. And as they get in the cost of living crisis, their demand for support from social services, for housing and homelessness, that is going up. So you've got a reduction in the amount of money coming in, and you've got a consistent long-term increase in the demand for the services and unfortunately the most costly services that a local authority provides. Add to that recent spikes in homelessness and the presentations of homelessness, which after a couple of years have been subsidised by the government, has been withdrawn. And then the last thing, the last of the long-term major impacts, is the increase in inflation and the money market. So suddenly, having got used to many years of very low levels of inflation, the cost of borrowing money has shot up. And what's happening is that a lot of councils are finding all of those pressures on them. So their budgets are getting squeezed, and the amount that they can cut off their services is basically running out.
In case of larger councils, as you mentioned in the article, like Birmingham and Nottingham, the article suggests some long-term issues.
Yeah.
What exactly you had in mind?
Well, those four things, right? For instance, the continuous drop in income from central government are scheduled to continue in the government spending reviews. So we know that there's going to be...
What's coming?
Yeah, the amount of money, we know what's coming. It's still going to be worse than it was in the last 5 years. The government have said the next 5 years they're going to subsidise the economy, and the way they're going to subsidise it is by taking an equivalent amount out of the money that they give to local authorities. So the rising inequality that is given rise to the demand on services, and that and affects places like Nottingham with high levels of multiple deprivation. The demands are going to increase. We know the demands are going to increase. We know the money is going to go down for another 5 years. So that rising water table, as it were, is going to catch more councils. And since Nottingham issued its 114 notices, we've had several indications from other councils. Day before yesterday, Bradford Metropolitan Borough indicated it's got a 114 notice. Not long ago, Middlesbrough indicated it was going to issue a 114 notice. The wave is coming.
On this income side, Professor,
Yep.
I'm from a foreign country.
Yeah.
What is going on there? I know how our local municipalities function, but how the municipalities here generate their income mainly?
Okay. There's four sources of income generation. One is by putting a tax that is collected by central government. So they get money from tax collected in central government. And that is the biggest part. Then they are allowed to have a council tax, a precept on housing. The central government one is generally collected in income tax. Then there's a precept on households in the city, and that's called the council tax. And that's it where it generates its own money. But the problem with the council tax is the council isn't allowed to set the tax itself. Or it is allowed to set the tax itself, but it must be within a limit. Central government puts a cap on how much council tax you can set. So, for instance, most years in the last 4 or 5 years, they've set the maximum increase you can set in council tax was 2 or 3%. Now, when inflation is running at 6%, demand and costs are going elsewhere. That is stopping the amount that a local council can raise. It's the government just this year is saying that it's going to allow them to raise up to 5% on council tax. But even that is below the rate of inflation and the rate of real costs to the communities. So here we have, those are the two biggest parts. There is a third whereby there's a rate collected again nationally but redistributed that is on business premises, right, that they can. And the final thing is that they have charges on their own some services they charge for, some income they get in terms of service charges. But that's round about less than 5% of the overall income. So those four areas are where they generate their income. But their total budgets, we have a long-term database that we've compiled in the business school that shows expenditure on all local authority services over a 18-year period that is calculated, deflated and calculated for the 351 authorities who haven't changed significantly in that time. And therefore, we've got a true overall long-term trend. Right, in all of those councils, in all of those services over all that period, every service, the expenditure on every service, bar social services, welfare payments and housing, have gone down in every local authority. And in every local authority over that period, since 2005, social services, welfare payments and housing have all gone up. The demand on council services is a long-term trend going up. The amount of money they're able to get in is a long-term trend going down.
Could you please tell me, or at least try to make some general parallels regarding some kind of cases in municipalities across Europe that are quite successful in dealing with these type of things, mainly maybe Germany and Netherlands and Scandinavian countries in particular, because it seems that here we have a troublesome situation that no magic wand can
well,
resolve.
It's making it a lot more difficult. But I'll certainly go on to Europe and North America in 1 second. Oh. But before we get to, all of this system was set up 25 years ago. And for 10 years, the local authorities were all improving, and were improving at such a rate that the amount of money that central government had to subsidise them with was going down at an increasing amount every year for 10 years. So the central government calculates a local authority can deliver its services at the same level every year, right? And it costs a certain amount of money for that. But because of technological change and what have you, it used to discount it at 2% less every year. Right, that was the long-term historical amount. So to provide the same level of services, you needed 98% of what you got the year before. Between 2001 and 2009, 2010, they were able to increase that, first of all, to 3.1%, then 3.4%, then 3.8%, then a couple of years later, it went up to 4.2%. So that by the end of that decade, councils were becoming more efficient and delivering the same services for approximately 6.5% less than they did the year before. Now, we have turned, the English Parliament has turned that around, basically, and it's gone to, that's why people are in a financial situation. They started issuing spending reviews that said local government expenditure was going down, and the reason that it was going to have to go down was that we've got into a sovereign debt crisis because of the Great Recession. So from 2010, every year, the amount of money that central government is being provided for local government has been going down. And it's almost inevitable, unless you can be efficient with your services and you can make more and more services more and more efficiently, then you're inevitably, a local authority is inevitably going to find itself under financial strain.
How likely is this to happen? How likely is that you will improve your efficiency to the level to keep up with this downward trend?
Well, local authorities have been incredibly efficient and effective at it, because we have had a spate of these 114 notices, and we will get more. But they staved them off for quite a long time. They'd staved them off by selling assets, reducing services, reducing the quality of services. But it's inevitable that time was going to catch up on them. And I think it was interesting earlier this week, for the first time on a national politics programme, they were talking about specifically the 114 notices, but when whichever political party was talking, when they said, well, what about the long-term funding of local government? What about the long-term structural problem we have? Then every party agreed, well, of course, that's a disgrace. You know, we need to turn that around. It isn't a matter for today. It's a long-term matter that will take some time. In fact, they've tried to restructure local government finances 6 times in the last 25 years. Both parties that have been in power, New Labour and Conservative dominated, and they've never managed to have the political will to carry it through.
I cannot help myself with this thought coming back from home, that these political circumstances really influence the relationship between the state the county and the very local municipal level. And the same kind of situation I encounter in the UK, which is very interesting, let me say.
Well, if you take those first 10 years, right, when things were, both central government and local government were committed to working creatively together to improve the local authorities. The central government embraced the problem as part of its problem, as well as saying, no, it's your problem to sort out. What has happened since? And that's very much the case in those parts of the world, whether they're in different states in the United States or different parts of Europe, where they collectively own the problem and try and solve it. They've been much better at solving it. It sounds silly, but sounds obvious rather than silly. But effectively, since 2010, the central government has said to local government, that's your problem, and you have to resolve it. And at various times since 2010 has added to the problem. So in 2014, they added public health as a responsibility that moved from central government to local authorities, unlike any money, sufficient money to pay for it. So from 2010, we have been increasingly misaligned. And basically, the people that we've given the job to do the welfare payments haven't got the resources to do it. And it's only going to get worse. But when you change the distribution of public resources, then there's winners and losers. And the losers tend to shout a lot louder than the winners.
Exactly. Given the fundamental factors you mentioned, do you anticipate that more councils, as you already mentioned few, will issue a Section 114 notice, and in which particular orders? As I've seen some of your tables that were appendix to the article, and what do you feel could be the overall solution, if there is one, aside from the fact that they definitely need to come together and we all need to realize that it's our problem, whether we talk about national or local level?
We know the solution to the problem, right? There have been four or five parliamentary select committee inquiries into what is the long-term solution to this problem. And so when they started, they didn't know the solution, but it has revealed, it's pretty obvious it reveals itself such that people agree the solution needs to include the following, right? It needs to include a change in the way you calculate the support to local authorities. It needs to change the amount of money and the way local authorities can raise money themselves. And it needs the third most important thing, it needs a distributional system that allows for equality, or a level of equality, so that all those places that can generate lots of money can subsidise those people, those parts of the country that doesn't. So there's three big things that are needed, one of which is this distributional system. Now, the distributional system we have at the moment was set in stone in 2013 and implemented in 2014 and is highly inequitable. It is also getting worse every year because the multiple deprivation factors that they've got into the calculation means that Nottingham is getting a poorer deal out of central government every year, and places proportionately, and places that are relatively affluent, take Dorset on the south coast, they are getting a better ones. So you can almost predict who is going to be next in line from having a look at the distributional system that was set in stone in 2013-14 and say, who did the worst on that distributional system? And I would suggest that you will get all the 114 notices from the worst off 50 councils at that time. Nottingham was at one stage, in 2011, Nottingham was the third worst distributional system. By 2013, it had changed, but it was still in the bottom 20. So Birmingham was. So you can predict which are likely to be the most vulnerable. And we have some tools these days that councils can use, that the government can use, that says how vulnerable are these councils to financial shocks. So there's a financial vulnerability index that's created by the professional finance men, chief financial officers of local authorities. CIPFA, it's called, the association. So they have a qualitative index that will show you which ones are most vulnerable. Even the private sector consultancies like Ernst & Young, they have got a predictor that says which authorities are going to be in difficulty next. So the government can't say that it doesn't know what's coming on the horizon, and neither can it say that it doesn't know what to do about it. It just doesn't want to do that. It doesn't want to take the steps necessary to solve the problem. It is in effect, the current government is in effect saying this is a long-term problem that we're kicking into the long grass until after the next election, which some people think they haven't got much chance of winning, and therefore they're kicking that problem over to their political opponents.
Professor, how do you think that Nottingham is going to respond in the next few months?
Nottingham will be under a financial savings plan that the government will want to approve, or it will insist that it goes financial savings plan that is acceptable to the government. And that's going to mean asset sales, reductions in services, how much money is spent on services, particularly the latter, reductions in services, because the reserves are down to the council's reserves are down to a bare minimum. But it's going to have to think about such basic day-to-day services as how often do we collect your bins, your waste disposal bins? How many times are we going to clean the streets? How many times are we going to clean the city centre and the suburbs? And the likelihood is that they're going to be reduced. How many times are we going to cut the grass in the parks? We cannot afford to cut the grass as often as we have in the past. How few times can we do it without losing the service altogether? So, the final thing is that everybody is affected by is basically public transport. At the moment, we subsidise public transport to a certain extent, but in the future, the likelihood is that's going to be reduced. Now, I don't want to be alarmist and suggest all of those things are going to happen, but over time, unless there is a fundamental change around in the system, those things are going to come about. So we're going to have less public transport, less clean streets, less parks and gardens for people to enjoy. And that's what the day-to-day people, that's what ordinary people in the street will start to notice.
What about transportation, Professor King? I also heard about you stating some very interesting things before about the transportation.
There's two things about the transportation. Planning integrated transport systems, which big cities tend to have. So the London, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, there is a passenger transport authority that allows much better integration of the different kinds of transport, so buses, trains, trams, etc. Nottingham does not have an integrated transport system because it hasn't got one by law, and that is a big potential improvement to the services in the conurbation of Nottingham. And that's why they're looking for the powers to try and become a passenger transport authority. By its very definition, it puts passengers first, integrate the system around what the passengers need. At the moment, Nottingham does not have a coordinated system, has no proper coordinating of it in the same way that bigger cities do. And yet, Nottingham is traditionally very, very good at public transport.
It is indeed.
Yeah.
Professor Murphy, before I let you go, I know you have a busy schedule today. I will just give you an opportunity to tell me a little bit about your program you're teaching at the NBS NTU, which I mentioned at the very beginning. You know that Spotlight Podcast is academic podcast, educational podcast.
Well, as things would happen, I'm on a, you probably tell by my age, I'm on a phased retirement. I'm trying to retire at the moment. So most of my stuff is research rather than teaching. I do a little bit of teaching for executive education and of course for the city council's management. And we try and get, all of my research is applied research. And the universities, both Nottingham University and Trent University, both have an understanding that they will attempt to help the local public services where they can. So the county council, the city council, the local NHS. And so as I come to the end of my career, that seems to be the place that I'm spending most of my time.
Professor Murphy, thank you so much for stopping by and talking with us about these very important issues. And I hope I'm going to see you sometime soon again.
It was my pleasure. Thanks very much for inviting me.